Welcome everyone. Hi, I'm Ian Fales, a visual effects journalist and the editor of Befores and Afters, and welcome to this third preview of the View conference. And today we're going to be talking about Pixar's Render Man with Dylan Sisson. Hi, Dylan.
Hi, Ian. How are you doing?
Good. It's great to see you. Where are you in the world at the moment?
I'm at home, on my deck. Yeah,
It
this
looks.
actually this actually rendered in RenderMan.
Isn't everything rendered in RenderMan?
Well, we're working on it.
So you're
Yeah,
in San Francisco.
I'm I'm in San Francisco. You're in Sydney, I
That's right.
believe. Yeah,
Yep. Yep. Been
yeah.
uh, locked down for a couple of months now, but have really been enjoying doing some of these online sessions for View. And, it's really fun to preview the conference that way, which is happening later in October between the 18th and 23rd. Thought I would put that plug in there straight away. Um, what's really great about View this year is that it's physical, as in there'll be something happening in Turin, but also there'll obviously be a large virtual component. And these preview sessions are literally previews of what's to come.
Yeah, the View's a great conference. There's lots of like high level content. There's a lot of technical content too, and I'm happy to be here, kind of talking about some of the technical stuff that we're doing. So we have some special kind of tech that we haven't shown off that much, and we're going to show it to anybody that's watching me, I guess. So we can see how that goes.
Awesome. Actually, for people who might not know you, and there's only a rare number of those people in the world, can you give a bit of a background about your role at RenderMan, but also other things that you do?
Sure. I started at Pixar in 1999, um, and I've been working in the RenderMan group since then. And some of the things I do. Uh, include kind of running the marketing department here. I'm kind of a visual artist. We have a small marketing team, me and Leif Peterson, and we run the marketing group. And a lot of the stuff you see in the world about RenderMan, that's we're working on that stuff. And I do a number of things at Pixar, including, I don't know if you're familiar with the walking teapot, Ian. I assume you are.
Oh yeah, very much so. Yep, love it
Yeah,
every year getting one from SIGGRAPH.
yeah. So that's something we've been doing since 2003, and I've designed them pretty much every year. And I have one of our older models here now, so you can kind of see there's a teapot on on the box there. That's the walking teapot. So
Nice.
I don't know how many do you have?
Oh, I've got at least 10. I wish I had more. And normally would love to get them from SIGGRAPH. What's actually happening this year, seeing as SIGGRAPH is virtual?
Well, it turns out that we're going to take the RenderMan Art and Science Fair virtual this year too. So we're not going to have it in person, and it's going to be the first, second, and third of September. And we have this problem where we have the teapots, but we don't know how
Hmm.
we're going to distribute them. So we're wondering how to do that this year. But
Oh,
I was thinking maybe you'd like to be the first person to get this year's teapot if we could try a digital transfer.
sure. How does it work?
Okay. I think it uh, might be hard to do it for everybody, but we can try it here. I think it's going to work pretty well. So I have this teapot, and I'm going to transfer it digitally to you right now. Are you ready?
Okay, yeah, got it. Oh,
Okay. So I'm just going to put it
oh,
over here.
oh, wow. Oh, I think it's coming through. Hang on. Is it- Oh, oh,
Oh,
Dylan. Um, there must be a rendering error. Um,
that's not going to work. That's not going to
kind of
work.
looks
We'll
good.
have to
Not sure if it walks. Oh,
we'll have to
oh,
we'll debug that.
yeah. Well,
File a ticket in Jira, and we'll get onto that. Yeah.
okay, we'll edit that out later.
Yeah.
Dylan, today we're going to be talking about a bunch of things. One thing I'm really excited about is stylized looks in RenderMan. But before we get there, I think, one of the big film releases earlier this year was Onward, which
Yep.
obviously has a bit of a stylized look to it. Can we talk about that and sort of the evolution of that look and how RenderMan was involved in Onward?
Yeah, I think we can. Can we bring up the slides? We have a deck of slides to show you, Ian. So I hope you enjoy them. Here's the beginning slide. This is where we live.
Oh yeah.
If people don't know that, and here is the Onward slide. So when we look at Onward, one of the things that makes Onward interesting is that it's a movie set in kind of suburbia. But instead of having humans living in suburbia, they're like elves and trolls and things like that. And the style of the world was basically 70% familiar, like 70% suburbia and 30% fantasy. And that was kind of the amount of fantasy that they put into the characters and the lighting and kind of guided the whole um, uh, kind of construct of the creative arc of the show. And here you can kind of see, if you haven't seen Onward, um, um, this is a shot from Onward. If you've seen Onward, you've probably seen this before. And so here we have basically a suburban kitchen, and there's a centaur standing in there and an elf. So those are kind of the trope of Onward is kind of a once fanciful world which has been kind of um, kind of turned into kind of a more suburban type of affair where you have the centaur, he's a cop, he's not running around chasing whatever centaurs chase, and the elf isn't casting any spells, he's making a toast or something. So um, that's one of the things that Onward kind of established was this typical look. And as far as RenderMan's concerned, what we do in the RenderMan group is we try and enable the crew and the cast and the director to fulfill that type of vision, whatever it is. And in this case, you can see it's very realistic. We have a lot of natural lighting, and uh, RenderMan's really good at doing that right now. So that's one of the things that we've done. And one of the things that was really great about this show was it was the first show that used RenderMan 22. And RenderMan 22, here's a little interactive session in Katana where you can see one of the artists, this is sped up a little bit, is firing up a live rendering session, and they're moving lights around and they're changing intensities of the lights, and they're able to do things now in RenderMan 22 that were impossible in RenderMan 21 because we've rewritten the architecture, the fundamental architecture from 21 to 22. So there's a big pipe that goes directly from the DCC, in this case Katana, directly to the renderer, RenderMan, and there's a very kind of fast exchange of information between the two. Before we would dump all that out into disk, the renderer would suck it up and it would get dumped and out, and it was much slower. And so we're able to do things now with RenderMan 22, like moving things during a live action rendering or live action render, or doing things like changing a keyframe or changing light linking, things that allow the artist to iterate much more quickly and try out more creative looks. So this is one of the things that we're really focused on in the RenderMan group, is providing a high level interactivity, because it allows the whole, excuse me, allows the whole studio to kind of step up and work faster, more efficiently, and more collaboratively too.
It's really interesting that interactive lighting stuff. I could just watch that on loop all day, and that's something that's helped your artists, do lots of iterations and get to different results. But also generally the film, by relying on RenderMan and sort of this physically based rendering that the renderer is known for, but then applying that to a fantasy world. I mean, I feel like there's definitely Pixar films where that's happened before, but it was really heightened to a point on Onward, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And in a lot of ways, where we've arrived with the technology is that we have basically tools that are analogous to a live action film set. So you have gaffer tools and you have the cinematographer that comes in, and you basically can set everything up just like you would do on a real film set. You're not cheating with lights as much as we used to maybe 10 years ago. So it makes things a
Mm.
lot more intuitive and artistic to set up. And so we set those up. And in the case of Onward, set it up and basically simulate what light would do if we had set up in a real live action set. And then the director comes along, the cinematographer comes along and says, you know what, we want to make it a little more magic. We want to twist things a little bit here. We want to break physics. We want to break what the physical light would do because we want to tell the story by manipulating lighting in a certain way or changing the look of a different highlight on an object or something like that. And there's a lot of tools that we have that are kind of the secret sauce behind our production, like such as light filters that allow us to basically take a light. You have a spotlight that has barn doors on it, right? You can kind of we have virtual barn doors that you can change and move around, but we also have things that you can just put into the scene, like a big sphere, and say inside the sphere, I want to change the specular highlights or the diffuse response or the color of the light, so you can actually non-destructively kind of finesse the lighting in your scene without actually changing your master lighting. So it's a very powerful thing. And that can all be done interactively.
Right. I think there's a million things that you could probably show us from Onward. One of the things I was going to ask about was the magic, which also had that stylized look. And I know you've probably got some slides for that. I hope we're not rushing through some of them that you had, but the magic effects were something that I really wanted to mention.
Well, Ian, I'm glad you asked about that. Let's go to the next slide here. So the development of magic, it starts with, a drawing of magic. It starts in the creative department. One of the things about Onward is that it's set in a real world that has trolls and things like that, but we don't really know what magic looks like in the real world because sadly we live in a world without magic. So they have to figure out what it looks like. And what they did was they went from there, this kind of a sketch, did a bunch of work, and then they ended up here at the end of it. So you can see that there's kind of a crazy magical look, and all that is interesting in the sense that it's actually still using physically based light transport, and they did a lot of intelligent things to make that happen, including using kind of new types of volumes that are more efficient and can illuminate a scene with less overhead than we did on our previous film. So if you take a look at this, these are all basically Houdini's components, sims. These are all components of that magic trick that get composited together and create the final magic effect. And one of the things I was talking about interactivity before, because we had more interactivity with Render Man 22, it was easier for the creative department, the creative art department, to talk to the sim department and say, hey, we want to try out some different looks, and they could kind of sit with them and adjust things on the fly and say, well, let's make it purple, and kind of do some things in live rendering that we weren't able to do before as easily. Before, you might have to send off a renderer and wait an hour for the renderer to get back and be like, this is what it's like in purple. Now you can just adjust some bars, and because interactivities increase so much, it allows a better conversation between departments, it breaks down some barriers there, and allows people to collaborate and make stuff that looks better quicker. So, what we like that. So that's what we're
Yeah.
supporting with Reddit.
That's awesome. By the way, everyone, I should have mentioned right at the beginning that we're going to leave a lot of time for questions for Dylan at the end. So please use the system to submit questions, and I'll be relaying those to Dylan at the end. I've been told by Dylan that you can ask him anything. He might not answer it, but you can ask him anything. So
Thanks.
please put those
That's
in.
that's true.
Dylan, obviously, Onward has that stylized look. there's an exciting thing going on in RenderMan right now that you can actually preview for us today, which is about stylized looks, basically non-photoreal rendering. What's that all about?
Yeah, let me just wrap up on this slide here and just jump
Oh
into
yeah,
that.
go ahead.
Oh, let me jump back. So this stylized physically based rendering, like all the stylization of Onward was done using kind of this physically based renderer, like this our modern path tracer. And we can break physics when we want to in certain ways, but we can't completely break it. And what our goal here is to really provide is a bunch of tools that allow us to work within this physically based kind of mindset and iterate really quickly. We're rolling out a new technology, and um, it's called stylized looks. So the stylized looks are going to allow us to not only allow creatives to iterate quickly and create different types of looks, but really create a broad uh, um, types of looks. And probably best just to kind of jump in and show you how that works. So there's a lot more, I think, kind of stylized rendering that we've been seeing the last 3 or 4 years, and there's been some really big movies that have done really well. And if you want to create a look that looks like a comic book or a look that looks like an illustration or a painting, um, up to this point, you had your traditional compositing based workflows where you kind of assembled that all in compositing. So you have your NPR, your non photorealistic rendering phase happening after the renderer renders out all these AOVs or secondary passes, um, where the sounds like the neighbors are having a party, but we have these AOVs. So when the renderer is rendering a point on a surface, it renders the color for that surface, but it has a bunch of other information in its head about the normal and stuff. All that gets written out. We can assemble that in creative ways in composite. That's great in some ways, and you can get a lot of interesting looks that we've seen, but it also results in something like this in the compositing phase, where you have these really complex networks that are hard for other people to understand, that can change shot by shot, and can really be confusing even if you come back to your own network like a month or two later. So it's a nice way to get new kinds of looks. But what we wanted to do is look at a system that delivered these non-photorealistic looks, kind of these stylized looks, within the brains of RenderMan. So what we wanted to do is not dumb down the renderer, but add NPR into the modern path tracer. So if we look at this slide, this is what we're aiming at now. So before in the past, if you were a modeler or animator and you wanted to see what your model looked like in NPR or in an animation or simulation, you'd have to write out everything into AOVs, take that in compositing, and then feed that all the way back up uh, into your, and view it in from your DCC. Now we have the ability to basically create shading components that represent these NPR nuggets. And that allows us to actually do the interactive IPR that I was showing you earlier. Remember with Farley and the light moving around. We can do that with NPR now because we have, that's the goal of the system. And so at the end of the system, you have PBR, NPR working together. RenderMan gets all those AOVs, keeps them in its brain, creates the stylized look, and then writes out the NPR image. You can also use compositing based workflows in conjunction with that if you want. Does that make any sense, Ian?
It makes sense to me. I'm really fascinated by this because I feel like it's going to open up a whole new realm of possibilities for artists. But I am curious about one thing because I'm sure I saw people using RenderMan to do fun NPR stylized looks before. Were people doing clever things, in their own way in previous times? And had you sort of observed that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the best examples of that would be the Iron Giant. So, a
Hmm.
great film, great animation, and the characters are 2D animated, but the Iron Giant himself is 3D animated to look like a cell drawing, including having the line work, the shader actually would vary the line work from frame to frame, so it looked like it was hand drawn. And that was also done back in the days of the Raise algorithm when RenderMan was a scanline renderer. And it turns out it was much easier to write shaders that did kind of non-photorealistic things because it wasn't a physically based system. Now that we've reinvented RenderMan as a modern path tracer, it was hard to kind of implement that. It was harder to implement it. So if you look at Iron Giant, there's a lot of 3D in the Iron Giant that you might not realize right off the bat. If you look at even the walking teapot here, let's see if you can see.
Mm-hmm.
See that cross hatching? That's from a shader from the Advanced RenderMan Companion, written by Tony Apodaca and Larry Gritz. And I took that shader and rendered the teapot with kind of that cross hatching look. And that was still using kind of the power of the RenderMan shading language to do that. So that's been something that's happened in the past. This is more integrated, and it's allowing us to adopt these interactive workflows that we were talking about earlier as well.
Right. Well, by the end of this conversation, I want you to tell me what shader this used, but we'll come to that later. I know that you have some slides. I know that you have some slides about the various looks that you can achieve using NPR workflows in RenderMan. Let's go through those.
Sure. So the basic recipe of the technology, and this is kind of the special tech that we haven't shown that much, what we're showing you, is that we have the basic recipe is we have these pattern nodes that plug into your shaders. We have live AOVs that are rendered in real time along with your beauty pass. Those represent the signals that get sent to the display filters that are used to drive different types of inputs and effects, like a line effect, a tune effect, a hatch effect, or a painterly effect. In this case, you can see over here, there's a cabinet. It has an IKEA-ish line look because it's a cabinet, and it's rendered kind of like in an illustration style. So we have thicker lines around the outside, thinner lines on the inside. In the next example, you can see the inside of the cabinet with a different treatment on the wired containers inside. The next slide represents a tune look. So this is just kind of a simple tune look. So it's just basically augmenting the diffuse response of the shader, uses the diffuse as a signal, and then we're able to create these kind of different bands. I can just plug in a noise function that I'm using to kind of create the breakup around the edges a little bit. And by changing the directionality and the size of my light, I can change the effect on how that looks. In this case, here's a hatching look. So it uses a number of procedural or progressive textures that I've created over here. I have a couple different ones of them. In this case, we have a hatching look on this treehouse. And by combining that with a light filter, I can focus the viewer's eye up to the top of the treehouse, leave less data or information on the bottom of the treehouse, and that allows us to kind of focus the eye of the viewer like an illustrator would actually do in a drawing. I can create that using one of the light filters that I was talking about earlier, and that just comes for free with RenderMan as a current renderer. You put that all together, you get kind of a nice ability to layer lines together, kind of this tune display filter and the hatching display filter. So you can start daisy chaining these together. And if you have some good reference to follow, you can create a really beautiful kind of image like this. This was created by 9-3 Animation and was founded by Ernst Grossbeck and Histro. You can read their names down there. They're so small I can't pronounce his last name. But what do you think about that image? That's kind of a cool image.
Well, I think it's beautiful, and I think, just to be really frank, there might be people around who didn't think that was something they would do in RenderMan. But I'm kind of excited that it is something you guys are pushing.
Yeah, and I think if you look at that image, you can see that there's these different clouds. Those clouds were created in Houdini. So they're pulling in the clouds from Houdini, uh, assembling it together in Maya, and really using kind of your traditional pipeline and making interesting, really kind of storybook, um, a very convincing storybook look here. And all these things are also animated too. They have animated versions of them. And in here you can kind of see the different detail in the shadows, and it has a a real specific type of look. And one of the things that we want to do with the system is not limit the types of looks that you could get out of it. So I also did some exploration that I thought I would show you today too. But before we get into that, we're also working on incorporating painterly effects. So I'm going to play this movie real quickly, and you can watch the camera kind of go through this courtyard a little bit. So you can see that that we can start using actually strokes that go off the geometry and create really interesting looks. We can daisy chain those with hatching, with the line and the tune, and start really formulating any kind of stylized look that we want. And
yeah, fantastic. I want to introduce this next section because I think people who don't know you, Dylan, might not realize that you're an accomplished digital artist in your own right. And I feel like some of this NPR stuff is so suited to your style in a way. And so what we're about to see is a bit of a demo of your own work. A quick plug for another place to look at one of those tutorial / Dylan demos is a recent issue of 3D World magazine, which is basically all about Pixar and just has so much great info about Onward, Pixar's history, and new stuff in RenderMan, including these stylized looks, where there's a pretty awesome like multi-page tutorial that Dylan did. So make sure you check out 3D World magazine. But Dylan, go ahead and show us your own tutorial demo insight into creating a stylized look.
Okay, sure thing. Yeah, so this is Inktober, and for like you're kind of saying, like for a long time, I've always gone to like restaurants, and I'll be in a restaurant, and after the main entree, the main course, and before dessert, I'll like draw on the menu or something, and I'll give it to the staff in hopes that I get like a free dessert or something like that. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it works. So I've been doing that a long time, and then I've been doing this rendering stuff on the side, and the NPR allows me to kind of combine the both together. So it's pretty exciting for me. This last Inktober, Inktober is basically kind of a challenge, like a personal challenge that people post stuff on Instagram during October, where you draw something in ink and post it every day with different types of prompts. So that's what I did. And instead of drawing in ink, I drew in digital ink and kind of translated my style into digital drawing with Procreate. So I just have a couple of those drawings to kind of show you the style. So this is day 19 sling. So this is an Inkapore sling. And you can kind of see some of the interesting things about the line work here, where it's thinner here, where the light's hitting it, it's thicker where there's shadow. So the thickness of the line implies weight. So that was something that I wanted to convey in these with these NPR tools for whatever this is. This is ancient, so it's just a bunch of old pens holding up something. And let's see, I clicked on the thing. I'll click on the thing again. And here's an ornament, it's Penn Station. And so you can see some of the same details I was talking about before. The thick lines on the bottom, the thin lines where the light's hitting it. We have these kind of specular highlights that I draw with the gel pen. And I really want to just capture that with something that I could draw on paper using Procreate. So I was happy with that, and I thought this would be a good first experiment to kind of do some R&D with the new NPR system, or the stylized looks as we're calling it now. And so I took the approach of looking at this original drawing and saying, if I was going to break that into lines and hatching, how would I do that? So here we have the original drawing. I broke it out into line work so you can kind of see the thick and thin lines. There's some hatching in there for shading. I also used a Copic marker. So there's a subtle wash. We have some white line work and some white hatching on top of that. So I created different display filters for each of these effects and drove them with different signals. And the subject that I chose was this 2D illustration from my Inktober series. And I thought, well, I want to create a 3D rendering of, NPR stylized look of this style and kind of recreate it with a new herald, if you will. And so what I did, here's the physically based model that I created. I started in Medium, so Adobe Medium. I jumped into Adobe Medium, took in my reference art there, and just kind of did some quick sketching. I like Medium because it allows me to kind of take my own kind of illustration kind of techniques and styles and directly apply them in 3D, so everything has a real organic look. I brought that into Adobe Substance, textured it really quickly, rendered it with RenderMan for Maya, as you can see over there on the left, and then voila, rendered it with the NPR system, and looks pretty good. I was happy with that, and this is how I got there. So I broke it down in the same way that I did with the Penn Station thing. So I have my final render here. We have the line work, where the line work is actually being driven by Y up. So surfaces that are pointing up are very thin or non-existent as far as the line goes, and where they're pointing down, they're very thick. The black hatching is driven by the diffuse, and I have a couple different types of hatching that are being driven by different manifolds and projections in the object in the scene. We have the Copic marker, which is the same display filter as the line work. It just has different settings on it, so you can see that you can get very different looks out of these different display filters. The white hatch, is much like the black hatch, except it's taking the specular signal instead of the diffuse signal, and the white outline's just kind of a outline that just kind of sets it off from the page a little bit. So that's kind of how I approached putting that together.
That's fantastic. I know that you've got a video that you can share that shows a bit of the RenderMan process as well. Perhaps we'll have a quick look at that workflow.
Yeah, I think that would be great. Let me click to the next slide, and we can bring that up. So here's a live rendering session in Maya, and I'm going to switch over to the globals, and I'm going to add a display filter that is just going to create a black background, or a textured background of a piece of paper. So I'm adding one display filter, and this is in real time on my Mac laptop. So it's actually renders pretty quickly. So on the left of the screen, this is it, our image tool. Yes, we named our image tool it. And you can see all these AOVs on the left-hand side. All those AOVs are being created. Some of are custom for the stylized looks, and some are just like a diffuse AOV. I've added a hatching AOV here. So I added the lines. Now I'm adding the hatching, and you can see that on the ink, the lines are going horizontally, and the other lines are following the actual light of the scene. So I'll add another Copic marker pass here. So I'm just kind of layering that in there. And I made these all, spent time creating each display filter. Once I create them, I can reuse them or combine them in different ways. Now to make it pop, I need to use the white hatching to kind of bring out that specular highlight, and then it starts feeling like a more of a final drawing there. And we can start doing things like changing the lighting. So if I move the lighting around, all the lighting in the scene is going to change. So the line work on the in the shadow will move around. the specular highlights, where the white is striking, that's going to change as well. I can move the camera. So if I want to adjust it or animate it, I can still do that within the context of the stylized look, all within an interactive rendering session. And here we can see basically, the same type of interactivity that we had when we were looking at Barley and Onward earlier. It's just the ability for an artist to get into a system, just fire up the renderer and start making changes and seeing the final pixels come in immediately is just very liberating from an artistic, creative standpoint. So moving things like that around, it's pretty fun.
Yeah, and as you say, because it's so interactive, you can really play with it and fool around with the different looks, right?
Yeah. So it's pretty. It's going to be great when it lands. We're busy working with it. We have some of the best people in the industry working with us on it, including Christos Obrechtenoff. He's at Lollipop Shaders, and we're really happy with what we're seeing so far. So I have a couple other slides that I can show you real quick. So here's the dynamic lighting response. So you can see that a little bit better. So on the left-hand image, you can see the lights on the side and the specular highlights are really, really changed, but it looks dramatic. And by taking the light and just adjusting a little bit, you can really dial in where the shadows are going to land. On the Herald on the right, you can see that the white line work is actually being illuminated from the bottom. So on the bottom where the lines are white, it kind of makes it feel like it's being uplit, and all the shadows are also being uplit. So that's kind of, you can get a lot of interesting effects out of it. And once we get to this point, I can just drop in any kind of random model that I have on my computer into the setup and get this type of NPR look. So I have a screen that shows some of that if you want to see it.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we have no choice. So let's see. So we have, so here's some random models that I had on my computer. I had a caveman, a crab, and a sphinx. And so I just dropped them in there, didn't tweak anything. And this is how they look. So it's a very kind of encyclopedia sort of kind of effect, which I really liked a lot. And you just get a little bit of the white highlights. You get some of this really nice cross hatching that's being mapped to basically the thickness of the lines. So it looks like it's all being drawn with one pen. And once you get that set up like that, you can take it in different scenes or mix those things together and come up with entirely different looks as well. So very, very, very fun playing with it. And I guess we're getting close to our question and answer, right?
Yeah, I was just going to mention we're getting a ton of questions coming through, which is fantastic. So maybe we should switch over to those and stay tuned right to the end when we'll give you a bit of a heads up about what else is coming in terms of talks from Dylan and also the View conference. But Dylan, are you ready for some Q&A?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
Let's do it.
I think the most important question I've got here in my list is Dylan single?
Oh, that's a great question. No, not really.
Oh.
I mean, well, I mean, I guess it's not like, it's like just no, not really single.
Okay. Let's move on.
Was that from you, Ian?
No, I don't think my partner would like me asking that question.
Okay. Okay, good.
I do like this question though, and again, it's a real treat to see some of your own personal stuff. The question here is, where do you get your inspiration for your personal artwork?
I've always been drawn weird stuff since I was a little kid, and I think I picked up a book by Edward Gorey My mom had some around the house, and I just devoured Edward Gorey's stuff. I've always liked the cross hatching and the line work. And when I had an internship at Fantagraphics, and they had a bunch of Ralph Steadman stuff there. They did a Ralph Steadman book, and I saw that, and I was like, it's like I had it's a dolphin that had come up for air for the first time. I was like, what is he doing? Like, it was kind of amazing stuff. So I think a lot of my inspiration is from kind of these comic artists and illustrators.
Hmm. Awesome. I thought we might jump into some technical questions about NPR. Someone's asked, is NPR a different mode integrator or part of PBR rendering?
That's a good question. The way that we've wired it together into RenderMan is to be as least invasive as possible. So we're just using the factory integrators. You could write a custom integrator that was doing special stuff, but we're just piggybacking on the factory integrator. So you can use the path tracer, you can use the inclusion integrator. And basically we have a pattern that plugs into your standard Pixar surface. That pattern, you can put a bunch of information about response to lines, to line thickness, to like a NPR albedo color and a bunch of custom things. And the display filter, we have a display filter that basically talks to those patterns in those shaders. And so when the display filter fires up and says, "Hey, I'm I'm a I'm going to find some lines in this and start drawing some in," that takes a signal. So maybe that's your typical diffuse channel, and starts doing things based on the different parameters that you can assign to it. And you can do a lot of things with creating lines. So you can make the line completely uniform. You can make the line thickness vary with a procedural function like a fractal. You can make the line thickness vary by directionality. So if I have a light shining down here, where it's brighter, the line could be thicker or thinner, and where it's darker, the line could be thicker or thinner. You can take the line and drive its color by an arbitrary swatch. Let's say make it blue or yellow, or you can say, "Hey, why don't you look at the albedo? You're on the surface. You know what color that surface is. Do you want to color yourself the surface color?" And so you can do that because in a lot of illustrative styles, line work will inherit kind of the color of the object. But there's also controls where you can say, "Well, and I want you to shift your saturation value, or I want you to switch your hue." So you could, if it was just kind of a brick, a kind of a unsaturated brick color, you could make it bright red, or you could make it a complementary color, or you could make it a blue or orange. So there's so much variation in the system for the different types of things that you can get out of it, that it's great. But it's kind of built to get as much from your normal PBR workflow as possible. So I could set up my scene. So you saw like I had that ink herald, right? And so that looks great in PBR. So it looks great in PBR. I just add some display filters to it. Those display filters look at the shaders and they start creating a different type of look. And I can switch over immediately. I haven't destroyed any of the physically based shading that I have in my shaders. I don't have to switch my shaders at all, and I can switch right back. So if I want to do something like, maybe I'm making a toy and I want to have an illustrative style that I want to put in the manual to assemble it. Like I can go back and forth between them, which is also a powerful function. And if I wanted to, I could say, "Hey, I want to use some light filters, or I want to use some lights, and I want to link certain lights to certain objects. And those objects are going to inherit one display filter, while another set of objects, maybe the background, maybe we have a character over here and we have a background, the background can inherit another display filter." So I could have my character actually outlined with kind of a cell, maybe cell shading, and the background could have a much more PBR type of look or a watercolor look. So you can break these things out by using things such as light group AOVs. So I can assign a light group AOV to a display filter and use that to drive specific portions of my image, if that makes
Brilliant.
sense.
Absolutely. We've got heaps of questions here, which is really great. I'm going to try and get through as many as I can. Another one that's of the technical variety is will NPR line rendering work with depth of field and other camera effects? And how about anime looks?
Um, Anime looks absolutely, and you can use the depth of field will do different types of things with the lines. So it depends on kind of the signal that you're sending it. So the line will get washed out with depth of field. You can um, set line thickness based on camera depth too. So if you wanted more control over it, you could say, hey, where my character is, I want the lines to be the thickest. And up front, I want the lines to melt away, and in the back, I want them to melt away. So it just depends really on the type of signals that you're sending these different display filters.
Okay, great. Next question is, do you have to model any differently for NPR?
Well, I think that really gets down to kind of um, your reference artwork and your target look. So if you want to just take like a transformer or something and say I'm going to put some line work on there and some cell shading, great. Probably look pretty good. But if you want to do like uh, a real specific type of look, you might want to start with that look in the modeling phase. That's kind of what I did with the Herald. Like I did that with the intention of when it gets to the NPR stage, I want it to kind of have that hand, kind of that organic sort of imprecise uh, surface area on these objects. Oh, it's getting windier here in San Francisco. Sorry about that.
Okay, hold in there, Dylan. Um, Here's another question. What's the benefit of doing NPR in render instead of post?
There's a number of benefits. I think if we're looking at compositing workflows, the compositing workflows can be very complex, and especially if you're doing a very sophisticated kind of shot, it can be overwhelming, especially if you're going to do it over the course of an entire production. If you're going to basically render about out a bunch of stuff from a renderer like RenderMan, especially Path Tracer, and say, now I'm going to do all the lighting in the compositing stage, and you can do that, but RenderMan actually knows a lot about lights. It knows a lot about surfaces. It knows a lot about the shaders and the textures that are in these objects. So by doing it in kind of this upstream phase, you gain a lot of simplicity, and then you gain a lot of interactivity. So if let's say I want to model a character specifically for NPR, I can be modeling that character and seeing that line work and immediately update. So I can view the actual NPR image while I'm modeling it, which you can't do with a compositing based workflow.
Right. I'm going to jump to some more general RenderMan questions, and maybe we'll come back to some NPR ones in a second. There's a sneaky question here. I don't know how much you can say, Dylan, although you might direct people to some of the SIGGRAPH talks. Which rendering advances were made in Sol?
Oh, well, that's a good question, um, and it's also interesting because like we're going to be releasing RenderMan 23.4 in August, right? And
Mm,
and and the Soul started as a 22 film, so it's actually using an older version of RenderMan that is available now, and we are actually shipping things that we delivered for Soul from the technology side in the latest versions of the software, as far as making it more powerful and robust. Soul, if you've seen the trailers and things, you notice that there's these characters that are basically volumes, and they have some outlines and stuff, and that turns out to be um, one of the most insane things that you can do to a technical team is just like be like, well, the characters in this film they're gonna be completely volumes, and it just it looks great, but there's a lot of things that we had to figure out to make that happen. So I think that's where a lot of the real elbow grease, uh, figuratively, that's where it went.
Awesome. Here's an interesting one. How do you see I guess machine learning, helping in rendering?
AI is something that we're looking at quite a bit at Pixar, and there are ways that we are already incorporating it into RenderMan as far as light selection. Uh, RenderMan will actually learn about the scene and what's important through progressive passes. We have a internal uh, denoiser, which is based on AI. So we're looking quite closely at applications of that type of technology to image synthesis.
Awesome. Okay, here's another fun question. Um, will Wendy make an appearance?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if that.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I had to ask that.
what she might. She might. We'll see.
um, here's a personal question. How did you get a job at Pixar, and was it challenging to get there?
That's an interesting question, and it turns out the first job I got in 3D, I got making kind of a Final Fantasy game. It was kind of a ripoff of Final Fantasy VII, and it was at a company called Crave Entertainment, and I got that job in part because I had played D&D in high school. So one of my interviews with one of the founders was basically, since I hadn't played like PlayStation Final Fantasy at that time, he's like, "You played D&D, right?" I was like, "Yeah." So we talked about D&D for about an hour, and he kind of was like, "Okay, you're legit." And I was like, "I wish somebody told me that D&D." Can you hear me? Did I freeze?
I can still hear you.
Okay. Um, I didn't realize that D&D was actually going to help me get a job, and it turns out my the creative director at that company that I was working for, her husband was the head of the RenderMan team, and I got the opportunity to jump over and start working on RenderMan, and that was back in '99, I think I said. So uh, that was before you could actually go to school to learn 3D graphics. So kind of had to pick it up on the way.
Brilliant. Here's another very important question. How long did you practice that teapot joke? We
Uh,
did practice it, but not that
uh,
long.
it's not a joke. This stuff is real.
It totally is. Sorry.
It's totally real.
Okay,
Totally real.
moving on. I think that actually leads into the next question, which is about the Rendering Art and Science Fair. How's that going to work this year? Obviously, since SIGGRAPH is virtual.
Yeah, so we're going to have our big launch announcement on September 1st. And on the 2nd and 3rd, we're going to follow up with a number of different workshops on each day, focused on, topics like NPR, XPU, and some things that we're not even talking about yet. So we have a bunch of interesting things that we'll be talking about. We'll be rolling out a new RenderMan challenge and showing off some new educational materials. So if you want to do stuff in quarantine and learn something new, RenderMan, you can download it for free, learn it. We'll have a bunch of new stuff at SIGGRAPH to kind of help support people getting started and people who are established in the industry. But we're persevering.
And Dylan, you might not be able to reveal this, but I'm going to ask you anyway, because it's a question here. Will there be a teapot this year?
It's a very good question. And the answer is you should come to Digital SIGGRAPH and our Digital Art and Science Fair and see what happens. It's a
That's a really
cagey
good
answer.
No, that's a really good answer. Um,
Okay.
well, I feel like I've asked you a sort of broad selection of the questions there, which were really fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for contributing those. And I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of them. Dylan, just to wrap up a little bit, I want to mention in particular the View conference. It's actually a really special conference in my heart, which I started going to about 10 years ago, I think. Maria Elena and the whole team there does an incredible job. What do you say to people about attending Turin if they can? Certainly this year and future years, but also the virtual conference. I obviously I'm a bit biased, but I think it's absolutely worth it.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing roster and agenda Maria Elena always puts together for the View Conference, and it's getting better and better every year. I think the maybe one of the positive things about doing it digitally this year is that people from all over will be able to kind of engage with it and see the types of um, things that are being talked about. So it's got some the focus on digital technology is really interesting, and there's a broader focus on the whole industry and the people in it too. So I'd recommend it very very much.
And just to give people a bit of a sneak peek at what I'll be doing at View in October is a couple of panels. One of them is on practical special effects, which I don't think we've been able to do too much at View before, and that's I'm really excited about that. And also something about virtual production. Obviously, that's in the news a lot. There's a lot of different things going on there, not just some of the biggest shows or films, but I think a lot of people are doing fun things on their own or in smaller groups. So I'm excited to run those panels. And I feel like Dylan, you're going to have a role as well again in October, and there'll be more to talk about then, right?
Yeah, I think um, we're still kind of playing it by ear as far as
Mm,
what we're going to be able to do in 2020. But we'll be doing something for sure. Yeah, we'll
awesome.
make it happen.
To
We'll
find
make it
out,
happen.
make sure you go to the website, which is viewconference.it. Dylan, I just wanted to thank you for joining me today for this preview and doing that teapot gag, which was, you know, what couple of weeks in the making, really, wasn't it? No, we did it this morning. But thank you so much.
No, thank you. It's great to see you and have a little chat. I feel more human. Okay,
Yes, great to
because I'm
interact.
in because I'm in because I'm in pandemic land all the time. So it's good to talk to a familiar face.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning, everybody, and thank you so much, Dylan. Thank you, View, the OGR, Pixar, RenderMan, and Maria Elena. Talk to you again soon, everyone. See you later.
Bye. Thanks you.
Bye.